Sean Combs has seen these sketches and he has some feedback. The disgraced music mogul told our sketch artist to soften it up because she is making him look like a koala. We'll break that down. Soft is how it appears Sean Combs' defense team has tried to portray Diddy to the jury during his sex trafficking and racketeering trial, seemingly trying to give off the vibes of a guy who would not say, quote, "I'm the devil and I could kill you," like a witness alleged on the stand. Diddy has made heart symbols for his family. He smiled at members of the gallery as he's entered court, often wearing subtle colors, sweaters, and khakis instead of the flashy outfits that came with his larger-than-life persona. But his Puff Daddy the nice guy starting to fade. It's been reported that he's had some animated discussions with his lawyers, and his facial expressions led the judge to put his foot down. We have the bad boy body language breakdown. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Sketches and descriptions from our reporter inside the courtroom are the only ways for us to understand what it might look like inside the courtroom during Sean Combs' sex trafficking racketeering trial. In federal court, cameras are not allowed. The sketches that we show you from the courtroom are done by an artist named Jane Rosenberg. She is a legend when it comes to the art of sketching the biggest trials, and we've learned that Diddy has reportedly been taking in her art as well. Rosenberg, who sits in the front row of the courtroom, told Reuters that during a break last week, Diddy came over to her and told her, quote, "Soften me up a bit, you're making me look like a koala bear." Art, of course, is all in the eye of the beholder. Rosenberg's sketches of Combs have, if anything, looked grayer, we've noticed, than the Diddy that many of us grew up watching, because since he's been in custody, which goes back to September of last year, Combs hasn't had access to the hair coloring products that he did on the outside. It's important to note he is 55 years old, so his hair is grayer and he also has a beard. Now, the day that Combs made that request to Rosenberg, it was the same day that the judge made it clear that he wants Diddy to cool it with facial expressions in the courtroom. The judge addressed the defense team and said, quote, "I was very clear this morning that there were not to be any facial expressions, other attempts to have any interaction with the jury whatsoever, any influence on the jury whatsoever, and I could not have been clearer in terms of what I said. You heard me, right?" And then he said, "Well, there was a line of questioning where your client was nodding vigorously and looking at the jury. And there was a subsequent moment, we had a sidebar, and I looked and I saw your client looking at the jury and nodding vigorously during that line of questioning. That is absolutely unacceptable." And he wasn't done. The judge then said, "It cannot happen again. If it happens again, if it happens even once, I will hear an application from the government to give a curated instruction to the jury which you do not want, or I will consider taking further measures which could result in the exclusion of your client from the courtroom." Now, I've talked with our reporter, Elizabeth Milner. She's been in the court every day for Law&Crime. She's been taking meticulous notes, and she's been observing Diddy and his body language and seeing how he's changed as this trial's gone on. And she says she believes that he still to this point looks very focused, that the stress of the situation, the frustration that he might be feeling hearing this blistering testimony from several government witnesses, it doesn't appear to be impacting him in the way that one might expect. She does say there has been a big difference in the way Diddy has acted since getting that talking to by the judge, because she says that no longer is Diddy looking at each juror as they enter the courtroom and leave the courtroom, which he has been doing since this trial started. But now it appears he is keeping his eyes forward and in some ways being on his best behavior. She said that Diddy's now looking at the judge, the witness on the stand, and passing notes with his attorneys, and again, no longer taking the time to make eye contact with the jurors as they enter and leave the courtroom. Before we get back to the latest from the courtroom in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, I want to bring you a Law&Crime legal alert, because if you received a Depo-Provera birth control shot and were later diagnosed with a spinal or a brain tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, takes just a few minutes, and you don't pay unless they win. So scan the QR code on your screen, use the link in the description, or go to www.forthepeople.com/LCDEPO to see if you qualify. Now, when you see some of these sketches, what can we take away from how Diddy is looking and the expression that may be on his face during some very difficult moments? Take a look at this sketch here. This is as Diddy was listening to a witness talk once again about the infamous 2016 assault on his ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura at the Intercontinental Hotel. And this is a sketch of Diddy looking at video that CNN released in 2024 that millions of people saw, and it has played a big role for the government in this trial, and it's come up multiple times. And you can see his hand on his head. We'll talk a little bit about what that body language may say in just a moment. On Friday, Combs also reportedly had an animated discussion with his defense team during a break from the testimony of a victim going by the pseudonym Jane. Jane talked about some drug-fueled sex events that she called hotel nights, and reportedly they left her with urinary tract infections and needing antibiotics. Now, to this point, it's been reported that Diddy has been very involved with his defense team, that he's had these animated discussions before, and he's often passed notes back and forth during testimony. It does appear that Diddy has tried to play the role more of a grandfather than a music mogul. His outfits fit more with Mr. Rogers than the Sean Combs who used to be the head of Sean John. We've often seen Diddy in court wearing sweaters and khakis with subtle tones like beige instead of flashy suits. There have also been cases where Diddy's tried to appear like a nice guy. He's walked into the courtroom looking at his family members in the gallery and giving them heart hands. As animated as he's been with his defense team, he's also greeted them often with big hugs to start the day, like this sketch that we got on Friday. But now, more than a month into a trial that could put Diddy in federal prison for the rest of his life, what does his most recent body language episodes tell us about how he may be feeling things are going in this trial, as several government witnesses have accused him of rape, of violence, of even arson, and several other crimes? Combs' trial is expected to last several more weeks. He is charged with racketeering, sex trafficking by force, and transportation to engage in prostitution. He has pleaded not guilty. Joining us once again to help break down the body language of Sean Diddy Combs during this trial is Susan Constantine, a body language expert. Great to see you again. Thanks for coming on Law and Crime. First, I just want to know your reaction to Sean Combs reportedly asking the sketch artist to soften things up a bit, and he thinks he's being drawn like a koala. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting his perception of how he sees himself. So obviously, how he sees himself and how he actually appears are two different things. So if he wants to appear more like a koala, I guess, or he's saying that he looks too much like a koala, either one, he's not happy with the way he's appearing. And the reason why he doesn't is because he can see his nonverbal communication is not positive. You know, the scowls, the smirks, the furrowed eyebrows, the clenched chest, the smirking, and all of that does not do him any justice whatsoever.
And for you, in your experience, because we are breaking down, works of art, these courtroom sketches, and these sketch artists are very good at putting pictures together and turning them out fast. How accurate, in your experience, as we're about to break down some of the sketches we've been seeing recently, are the artwork of a courtroom sketch artist compared to the reality of what we're seeing in the courtroom?
No, they're not. And I'm going to tell you why. Expressions, especially those that are concealed, flash off the face in 1/15th of a second and then go back to neutral. So when you're looking at an expression, what it's not telling you is what was the stimulus, what was the question, what was the reason why he had that appearance. So when you've got a sketch artist who is drawing it, most often they're more exaggerated. So the deep furrows, the deep lines in the face may not truly depict exactly what it was. So as I read facial expressions, I'm looking at all of the 52 muscles in the face and how they morph on and off the face, and what is a duration, the symmetry of those that you can't get in a still photo because it's a moving picture.
No, that's a great point. And you think too of that snapshot of a moment, and maybe it's a moment where the face, he makes some furrowed expression, and then we break it down and it's like, look how mad, he's in court all
Yeah.
day. He was scolded by the judge, and we had heard
Mhm.
prior to this conversation the judge had with the defense last week that Diddy was making eye contact with each juror when they enter the
Hmm.
courtroom and they leave the courtroom. And I know we talked about that last time, but apparently he crossed the line in the eyes of the judge
Hmm.
because he was nodding to members of the jury. What do
Hmm.
you make of, what should we take away from what the judge perceived Diddy was doing in court?
I think that what he's doing is overemphasizing. So the fact that he's making direct eye contact with the jurors is used to persuade them. And he's sending nonverbal messages. You know, humans emote almost 2,000 messages in 1 hour back and forth. That's what the research says. So when he is looking directly at the juror, he's using it to influence, to persuade a juror. That is why the judge is really upset about it, because he is not supposed to nod his head or in disagreement or in affirmation, because what he's doing, he is literally testifying non-verbally to that jury. So he's using that only for one reason: to control, to coerce, and to persuade that jury.
How common is it? Because I know the judge, when he was, and there's so many rules in this trial, and it's so detailed, where even facial expressions are something that the judge does not
Mhm.
want to see Diddy make in the courtroom. How common is it to have those type of rules in place where a defendant can't be made, they can't make faces, with in the way that I guess Sean Combs has been making?
Well, if you look at Sean Combs in the real world, he doesn't show a lot of emotion anyway. He's quite stoic. He has this kind of rounded mouth, but with almost kind of expressionless in most of the photos that we see. So the reason why the judge does not want facial expressions, not just in this case, I've seen it in the Casey Anthony trial. I mean, I remember Judge Belvin Perry saying, I don't want to see anyone out here out in the gallery making expressions, or even the defendants or the witnesses making expressions. Because why? We're reading them. See, now then that's reason why, because I'm here reading those expressions, and then I am telling the world how I'm seeing it. So the expressions are, if you think about it, it's just emotions revealed. You know, we've done a lot of research on, the percentages of how we communicate nonverbally. Just with the face in itself is 55% of how we communicate. The other thing is that when you show expressions of, let's say, sadness or concern, you literally can provoke that emotion in another person when you're looking at them. So you can't discount the energy that you're sending and receiving to other people. Take, for example, when you're hearing a story about something that's really sad, you're hearing it from your friend. And as they're telling you the story, your eyes are becoming more empathetic. So that's what's happening. He's provoking an emotion, and he's sending a message to that jury. And that's what the judge does not want him to do.
Let's talk about some of these sketches that we've seen over the past couple of weeks since the last time we talked. And one that really stood out to me, because this 2016 video of Sean Combs attacking Cassie Ventura in the hallway at the Intercontinental Hotel has been central to this trial. And this one sketch that I noticed is Diddy leaning forward. He has his hand over his head as he's watching this video. This is when a video expert was up on the screen. Our Elizabeth Milner in the courtroom has said that Diddy has, for the most part, remained kind of in that stoic perception. He's taken time codes down of certain pieces of video to pass notes, it seems, to his attorneys. But what do you see when you look at that sketch with Diddy with his hand over his head?
Disbelief. So when we think of disbelief, and also what he's doing is almost partially face blocking. When you're doing this, it's like you almost don't even want to see it. So that's the emotion that I see. The other thing is that anytime you see the hand on the head, it can be a sense of overwhelmingness. It's what we call flooding, emotional flooding. But I think that when he's looking at this photo, he's literally seeing himself outside of his body, looking inward as a motion picture and seeing it in real time. And I think that he is blown away by what's actually happening. Because remember, when somebody acts out in the violent way he did, this is what happens. They lose emotional control. When you lose emotional control, you also lose logic. So now all of a sudden he's looking at it through a different lens, right? He's actually seeing it in real time. And this is what's creating that overwhelmed disbelief. He can't believe he did it. Facial blocking, which is you almost want to block yourself from what you're actually seeing because it's too painful to look at it.
And you wonder too, I mean, just for him, not only seeing that it's him in that video, but understanding that this has come up multiple times and he's continued to have to watch it. And there's another one as he's watching that video, I noticed too. What does when someone takes their hand and puts it over their mouth, as we see Sean Combs do? It's kind of like a this type of kind of body language that he has. What does that tell you as he's watching this 2016 video, but seems to have like a hand over his mouth?
Well, there's a lot of different interpretations for one gesture, so there's many meanings. One of them is, right, we've got words that we want to say and we're holding them in, right? So we tend to block. He does a lot of the facial blocking, so it's disbelief. They're words that he's not wanting to that he wants to express, but he's holding back. The other part too is when he's doing this, or even hand here, he's analyzing. There's a form of critique that's actually happening. So when you see anytime you see a hand over a face, hand touching over the mouth or over this, these are what we call manipulators. And manipulators are self-soothing gestures too. So he's not necessarily rubbing because we don't actually see that in real time. Is it a video he was doing this? That would be something different, right? Withholding and then self-soothing. So, but anyway, hand over mouth is generally concealment.
And then we've talked about how Combs has played a very central role in his defense. He's not a passive defendant by any means. He's passing notes to his attorneys. He's had animated discussions, we've been told, with his attorneys during breaks. And there's a sketch of him standing at the defense table with his lawyers. He's kind of leaning forward with his hands on the table. What does that body language tell you about the role that he's playing in communicating with his attorneys about his defense?
Okay, this is a power stance. Okay, anytime you see, and imagine now a person leaning on a desk with their fingers kind of spidered out. There's no different. They're all different power poses, positioning. So what I'm seeing here is dominance, power, control. So he's got one foot kicked back, one leaning in, right? He's not feeling firmly grounded because you would see him squared off with his attorneys. He's leaning forward, so that is a form of persuasion, could be intimidation, but also too, look at the other people that are looking. So do they have open eyes? Do they appear as if they're listening? So that changes the scenario because there could be kind of a group discussion that is happening, which would create this kind of secretness, leaning in, not wanting to be back and speaking out so that everybody else can hear. So everything that you see, you have to take into context, and you can't assign a specific gesture. Some of them are much more if they're illustrated, as they're emblems, like a specific word with a meaning. But in this scenario, it could have many different meanings to that moment. But generally, I would say this is dominance, power, control.
What is the advice that you give defendants you've worked with about how they should act in the courtroom?
I always lean on the side of being neutral. If they're when they're testifying, it's okay for them to glance over at a jury, but quickly come back, but not every single question. So the other thing is that I tell them, if you have something that you need to write down, or you want something you want to pass over to your attorney, instead of whispering over, because it can be a distractor for the jury, send them a note, pass it along. Small little head nods, just little small little head nods, right? Not these great, big, large, exaggerated gestures. And we see the same thing in the Karen Reed case, right? So, and the thing is, what I tell my clients is that how you're presenting yourself, it is the perception of each one of those jurors to interpret what they think that he's doing and what he's emulating. So you have to be really careful to not over emote, over face and over emote, because some jurors might look like, oh yeah, he's trying to connect with me, or that feels really weird, I don't like it, or oh, he's connecting with me, he must, we're building rapport. So see what can happen when a person is constantly looking at a jury. Now, in this case, it's not a murder case, so it's a little different. If it was a Brian Koberger case and the Brian Koberger was looking straight at a juror, it could be really creepy, right? Because
Mhm.
he's, void of emotion. But overall, I always try to keep them neutral. I want them to keep their face softened. And that's how I change, not just in their facial expressions, that's carried out in the way their clothing, how they sit in the chair, and I try to keep their emotions more neutral. So I work with my clients and with their thinking to try to get them to soften up, because when a person starts to grimace or tighten their muscles up, it could be appearing angry or concealing frustration, and that's not what we want the jury to see. However, I don't want somebody stone faced. I know that Casey Anthony was kind of a blank sheet, and I was in the courtroom during that entire trial. It worked for her in a lot of ways, but when the cameras were off, Casey Anthony came alive, but the jury never saw it. So for a lot of us, we knew that it was performance. So you have to really be careful. I want to keep them more neutral, softened up, in a more neutral position and not over emoting.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up Karen Reed, because I know in the documentary that was on Max, she talked about, in her perspective, it's difficult because if she's smiling, it seems like she doesn't care. And then when she's serious, because I would think in Sean Combs' case, the fact that he's remained stoic through all of this, where you're hearing people you were once very close with detailing horrible allegations against you, and it could put you into federal prison for the rest of your life. What does the fact that he's able to somewhat keep it together tell you
Well,
about Sean
again,
Combs?
yeah, I think that overall he's very controlled. He's controlling his emotions, but he also realizes what's at stake. And the other thing is that that kind of frozen expression, that's in deep thought, right? That person is, he is internally processing everything that he's hearing, and it's overwhelming. So he's masking it by controlling his emotions and not emoting to let that witness uh, make that witness feel that he is responding from them, are responding from what their allegations and what they're testifying to. So we have to look again at everything in totality. But overall, I think that he is, there's times, even like with Karen Reed, where they over emote. And they move around too much, which can be very distracting. There's very rapid movements when they're talking to someone, or when the attorneys, and they're raising their eyebrows or they're winking. We saw that with Karen Reed. Those are, you have to be super careful with that. You don't want them to be like cold as ice, but this is not a murder case, right?
Right.
These are other allegations. If it was a murder case and they were really stoic, didn't show any emotion, I would say we've got a problem here. You need to show some emotion at the right amount, at the right moment. But that's not the case here. I would, if I were working on this case, I would be listening with more interest, right? Interest in what they're saying. You don't have to show the grimace like you disagree, because I don't want him to look like he's angry, because that's exactly what he's being accused of: control and dominance and power. So his overall appearance is why they probably put him in a sweater, right? They're trying to soften it up. That's why he wants to have his photos changed so he looks a little bit softer. So it's interesting, the whole dynamics, and how there's a lot of power play and image, because optics are important, and optics people judge on.
And not only is the jury judging Sean Combs, but you have so many of these witnesses who are detailing very traumatic experiences they said they had at the hands of Sean Combs. And the body language of these witnesses, I'm sure, is
Mhm.
something that the jurors are trying to take in, is whether they're figuring out whether it's authentic. And there is one, this is from a witness who claims that Diddy accused her of, or she accused Sean Combs of threatening to throw her over a 17-story balcony and then throwing her onto a coffee table. Diddy's team is disputing whether this actually happened on the day that she said it did, but you have this sketch of her with her hands in the air, kind of detailing this story.
Mhm.
Um, what is how do you prep a witness on how they present a story, like in this case where she's being very animated? Is that something that you want from the government's perspective in
Yes.
telling what was a very dramatic story?
Absolutely, because what I'm looking at is the timing of a gesture, whether it be a baton one or whether she's describing the moment, the magnitude of it. You know, the body is broken up into what we call truth zones, and Mark Bauman talks about this. When there's something like catastrophic or maybe something that's overwhelming, your hands go up, right? Now imagine if she was describing that and her hands were down. It's incongruent. So your gestures are illustrators to illustrate the moment and the intensity of that time. We use gestures to communicate and to add to the story so that it will send a message. But I don't believe that she did that out of performance. I think that it was she was describing at the moment. And the thing is, if I were there and I saw it, I could tell you if it was performance or whether it was faked, because there is a timing. Like if the timing of where her hands went up was delayed when she was talking about he had me up here, then I would know that that was performance. But when it's in synchrony with the words at the same time, then it is not performance and it's real. And those are really important because those are very demonstrative of what she actually experienced. Now, it's not just the hands, her facial expressions, maybe the fear and the panic she has, and her vocal tone. All of that plays into that event truly happened or whether it didn't. Because if the tone wasn't right, the gesture wasn't off, she didn't show the surprise or relive it somewhat, then it's going to be in performance.
Yeah, and to your point about kind of courtroom sketches that captures that moment, the idea of when the arms went up, that's something that only the people in the
Mm-hmm.
courtroom really can know, and we can't tell from the sketch that we received. Two of the other victims who have told very traumatic stories, they go by pseudonyms, Mia and Jane. I know I sent you two of the sketches there. Their faces have been redacted and blurred, but you can see their body language as they're telling these stories. And one that I'm looking at right now is Jane, who's in a kind of a burgundy coat. She has a tissue over her face, and then Sean Combs is kind of going on, and he's watching her testimony. From the sketches you've seen, how would you characterize Sean Combs' body language during these very dramatic moments where people are accusing him of some very serious allegations, sexual allegations that I'm sure for him, are very difficult to hear, and for certainly the witness to be able to tell.
Yeah, well, he's definitely not leaning forward. This is the time where he's leaning back, right?
Yeah.
So now he's kind of distancing. That's all distancing, right? Here's the victim, right? And so what he wants to do is he wants to distance himself from. If he's interested and he wants to coerce, he leans forward. If he's trying to block, he goes off to the side. So you can see what he's trying to do. He wants to distance himself from the actual event and what he's saying. So now let's look at her body language, right? So the tissue. Is she really showing real tears? It doesn't show the tears, but she's got a tissue. Well, we've seen that also too with Amber Heard, boo hoo, and then you've got no tears. So,
Right.
I don't know if there really were tears there, but what we're looking for is the head down. Do you observe any other psychophysiological responses like running noses? That generally all those systems work together. With the head down, the covering of the face of shame and guilt and embarrassment, is that all congruent together? And then her vocal tone, is it broken? Does it feel like it jags on and off? Is she having a hard time breathing throughout it? Because she's now reliving that experience. Because see, the issue with all of this is reoffending that witness, because those are trigger memories. You're seeing a response from a trigger memory, because you don't ever forget anything, especially traumatic experience. It's all filed up into your subconscious. So when you're talking about it, it actually recreates and re-traumatizes that victim. And that's why you're seeing all of these physiological responses, the crying and so forth.
And in this next sketch was one that was a close-up of Sean Combs's face. And that's when we're not necessarily seeing him leaning back, but this was during emotional testimony. And I just noticed his eyebrows were kind of raised. It was as if he was kind of just, to me, being the untrained person, just very very tuned into what the person was saying and kind of processing all of it. What did you see?
Yes, when that leaning forward is interest, leaning back is disinterest. It's that simple. So what we're at when the body moves based off or off from their baseline. So if she's speaking about something and all of a sudden he's back and now he's leaning forward, right? He's more interested. But is his eyebrows frozen? Are they lifted up and leaning forward? Because that can be a form of intimidation when you lock eyes. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but is he blinking eyes like this when he's leaning forward? That could be cognitive load. That is mean it's almost like there's an overwhelming, a flooding of emotion that's going through at that time. So again, I come from a place of I link things together, and unlike maybe some other experts in my field, I go by what's based on research, what has been proven, and how you cluster them together to come to a hypothesis. So, all of these things that we're seeing, especially in sketches, I just want to let you know that you have to consider this being a little bit sketchy.
Sure. No, that's a really good way to phrase it because, as much as a picture sometimes only captures that snapshot of a moment, with a sketch, it could have just been, it's so subjective with, these artists are very good, but at the same time, how much can we read into it? The last sketch is of the victim, Mia, and I just noticed her body language. It seemed like as she was telling the story, she's kind of leaning forward. We can't see her face, but what did you take away from just what does her body language tell you as she's telling a very difficult story that she says happened to her at the hands of Sean Combs?
So anytime the shoulders kind of go inward, you're losing confidence. When you are in self-protection mode, we go into fetal. Okay, so we kind of round our shoulders in and we kind of collapse is more at the waist. The fact that she's not back up and feeling confident, shoulders back when she's testifying, um, would be a bit incongruent compared to the catastrophic event that happened at that time. So that would be consistent with somebody that's been abused, that's been controlled, that she's fearful, that she's feeling uncomfortable, and we lose our confidence. It's just like a balloon just losing all of its air and it's collapsing. So always pay attention to those, not just in her body positioning, but I would assume that her facial expressions too. I mean, when she's not covering, are her pinched eyebrows going up in the corners here like she's distressed? Are there horizontal lines going across her forehead? Did her face become more flat and expressionless? Does she appear to be in a fog because it's almost like she's had to detach from that horrible event? So there's a lot to look at, but overall, she certainly does appear to be someone that certainly has no confidence there and is very guarded and protected in a fetal position of guarding herself to protecting herself from a traumatic experience.
No, I mean, this was, so many of these sketches. I mean, again, just a snapshot of what's going on. I mean, it'd be incredible if we could have had this trial with cameras, but I know that that's not how the federal court system works, unfortunately. Susan Constantine, body language expert. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for kind of going through these sketches and giving us your thoughts. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. Have a great day now.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.